This is the new 2025 BMW M5, and it's the latest model in an iconic performance sedan lineup that goes back 40 years, the BMW M5. The new one is bigger than before, heavier than before, more high-tech than before, more powerful than before, more expensive than before. It may not be the purist's favorite, but the lineage continues. Today I'm going to review the new M5 and show you all of its quirks and features. If you've been watching my videos for a long time, you'll remember I used to take my cars to CarMax to see what they'd offer me as a trade-in value. These videos were fun and popular as they would often give me a wildly inaccurate number for the cars. Submit your cool car to Cars and Bids in just a few minutes and you'll be connected with an auction manager from my team who will help your car go live on Cars and Bids, where you'll get way more money for your car than trading it in to a big box dealer. Look at how much these cars sold for on Cars and Bids compared to their trade-in value. Here's a trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Here's a trade-in value and the Cars and Bids result, and this was a trade-in value and this was the Cars and Bids result. Get started now and sell your car on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new BMW M5, and to give you an example of just how advanced and high-tech this car is, check this out. When you switch into sport mode, the ambient lighting in the center of the dashboard changes from your pre-selected color to the BMW M logo colors. That's right, you go into sport mode and the ambient lighting is now displaying the BMW M colors proudly, like waving a flag right in the middle of your dashboard. You might think this is a gimmick, you might think it's silly or stupid or really cool, but regardless, it's very distinctive, very interesting, and indicative of just how special and crazy this car is. And in a minute, I'll get to more of the crazy quirks and features of this car, but first, let's talk through some basics. This new M5 is the 7th generation model. The original M5 really did launch 40 years ago, more than 40 actually. This is a long-running lineage, and the new M5 is obviously based on the new BMW 5 Series, which came out last year. Now, like the new 5 Series, the new M5 is, to put it charitably, massive, gargantuan, huge. And that's been one of the biggest complaints about this car from the enthusiast community. And indeed, it's big. It weighs 5,400 pounds, which is a pretty big number for a car like this, and around 1,200 pounds more than the outgoing M5, which wasn't exactly a car known for being small and compact. It's also just physically long. 200.6 inches in length makes this new M5 longer than any previous short wheelbase 7 Series model, right up to the 2016 version. And even compared to that, it's only 0.1 inches shorter. So this thing has really ballooned in size and weight. And considering it's a performance car, it's supposed to be fun to throw around curvy roads or a racetrack, well, the complaints have followed. However, in order to keep the enthusiasts happy and to neutralize the size expansion of this car, BMW has done some pretty impressive things to try to keep the new M5 on top of its game. And one of those things is just giving it more power. The new M5 still has a V8. No EV, no turbo 4-cylinder or 6. It's still a V8. Now, it's a plug-in hybrid, but it's a V8 nonetheless, and it has just shy of 720 horsepower, which is obviously a massive figure and around 100 horsepower more than the previous M5, depending on what version you get. This car also has just shy of 740 pound-feet of torque, which is also a huge number and about 185 pound-feet more than the previous M5. So some significant boosts in power. Now, like the previous M5, all-wheel drive
M5 is still standard on this one, and 0 to 60 is achieved in around 3 seconds on its way to a top speed of 190 miles per hour. This car is a serious performer. And it's not intended to just be fast in a straight line. Obviously, this car has some huge suspension improvements and upgrades over the regular 5 Series models, and it comes standard with 4-wheel steering, which really makes it feel like a smaller car than it is on the road. That's the intent of 4-wheel steering. It almost always succeeds, and it does here as well. And just to make sure enthusiasts stay on the M5 side, BMW also threw one other very special nugget their way. The new M5 will be offered here in the States in a station wagon body style, the M5 Touring, for the very first time ever. Not just a sedan like this, but a wagon will be available. Now, this is cool. Enthusiasts love fast performance wagons because it offers SUV practicality but car driving dynamics. Frankly, I'm not surprised BMW's doing this after the runaway success of the Audi RS6 Avant here in the States and the general success of the AMG E63 wagon. Now, there's a third big dog wagon coming, the M5 Touring, and I can't wait. And beyond all the power and performance upgrades, there are some other goodies on this car that make you feel special to have an M5. Some quirks and features, let's call them. Starting with the obvious, the wheels. It has big wheels and a distinctive design to distinguish it from other 5 Series models, and it has big brakes, as you can see, and this one even has gold calipers to give it a rather distinctive look on the outside. You also have a large rear diffuser in back that definitely separates this car from your standard 5 Series and gives it a more aggressive performance car, almost race car look in back. And there's some subtle exterior quirks and features that also make you feel special, like how when you're walking up to the car in the dark, the M logo lights up from the rocker panels on the side of the car. And the cool thing is it's not integrated into the door. So when you open up the door, the M logo stays still in place, always reminding everyone that it's an M. I also like the subtle M5 logo printed into the Hofmeister kink behind the rear windows. That looks pretty cool, a little subtle flex for people who notice it. And the key is pretty special. It's a fairly minimalist design, mostly a smooth black finish, but I like the M colors are integrated, and the BMW logo is the lock button, which is kind of cool. You could press that every time you walk away from the car to remind yourself just how special your M5 is. Now, with that said, some of the exterior quirks and features go a little too far. The most obvious example is the grille, which is absolutely massive and needlessly so. You can see only a portion of the grille is actually open for cooling. A lot of it is just flat panels, and obviously they're for cosmetic purposes, and it actually gets worse because when you're driving the car, the grille surround lights up with running lights, which is a really in-your-face, kinda tacky and tasteless display of showing off in this car. Certainly kind of kicks out some of the subtlety that we're used to of previous M5 models. Generally though, aside from a few drawbacks, I think this car, from a design perspective, lives up to the M5 promise, which is take a 5 Series and make it badass. That's this. And next up, we move inside the new M5, where the first thing you discover is a very high-tech, advanced, luxurious, modern interior. This cabin is quite impressive for its quality, for its equipment, for its modernity. This certainly isn't looking to the old days, the retro M5s, for inspiration. This is forging ahead in a totally new path, and it is very modern, very advanced, and very nice in here. And actually, the first thing you notice is the seats. You sit down on them and you have these heavily bolstered sport seats, which are pretty cool. They even have the M5 logo in the backrest lighted. There's a lighting element in the seats. It's actually a pretty cool feature. It's neat to see that there, and it adds a cool quirk to the interior. And speaking of lighting, I already showed you one of the party tricks. You go into sport mode, and yes, the dashboard ambient lighting turns into the BMW M colors, which is certainly interesting. But even when you're not looking at the M colors, just the regular ambient lighting is unusual here. It's not a little light pipe like in so many other cars. Instead, it's this like light panel with with geometric shapes and cuts. It's very unusual and very futuristic seeming. And it doesn't just change into the M colors. You go into sport mode. If you put on the hazard lights, the whole ambient lighting flashes with the hazard lights, I guess to remind you that they're on and that you're a hazard. And underscoring the look of this lighting and the general interior, I should say, everything in here is high tech. There is no old school in this interior. For example, the climate vents. Well, what climate vents? You look around and you don't see them because the climate vents have been made incredibly tiny. They still push out a lot of air, but they're totally de-emphasized for a more minimalist look that's not broken up by these ugly vents. And even controlling them is futuristic. If you want to change the amount of airflow coming out the vents, there's no dial like in most cars. Instead, there's this electronic slider. You slide your finger from 0 to 1, indicating exactly how much air you want to come out of the vents. Each climate vent has its own electronic slider. Even the door locks in this car are not a traditional button. Instead, they're on the driver's side light panel, and you tap on it and it lights up when it's locked and turns off when it's unlocked. In fact, even opening up the fuel door, that's not a little latch in the footwell or a button on the side. It's also part of one of these panels. You tap and then the fuel door electronically pops open. There's no mechanical anything here. Everything is futuristic and modern. And of course, that also goes for most of the rest of this car's controls, which are almost entirely integrated into the center infotainment screen. Now, fortunately, this infotainment screen and system is fantastic. It's tremendously responsive to your touch, lightning quick as any other manufacturer I've seen or the best smartphones. It's a large, easy to read screen that's angled towards the driver. It all works well, and it's very well designed and well implemented. However, it does include basically all of the vehicle functions, and that means the climate control is integrated into this screen. No traditional climate control buttons. You gotta use the screen, but fortunately the climate controls stay put at the base of the screen, so you don't have to go deep into some menu to change the temperature or the airflow. You can all do it here. However, it is a little bit annoying to turn on the heated seats. You don't just push a button like in most cars. You gotta tap the heated seat icon on the screen, then tap again to select your heated seat level. It just adds a little bit of complication. But when I say all of the controls are integrated into the screen, I really mean all of them, and that includes turning on the map lights, the dome lights inside the car. So you can turn on the map light by just tapping this button and it turns on. But if you tap the button directly behind that, this one, it doesn't turn on all the lights or the two front lights. Instead, it pulls up the map light section of the infotainment system, where you can then turn on the map lights individually for the front seats, the rear seats, and the overall central dome light. That's all done through the infotainment system rather than having to deal with individual switches. That's pretty high-tech futuristic. Now, another cool thing in this infotainment system is that the drive modes for this car are tremendously configurable, much more so than in other cars, including other performance cars. You can change the transmission shifts, the steering, the braking, which I don't often see. You can even adjust whether you want the car to be in all-wheel drive, which is the default, or two-wheel drive, where it goes rear-wheel drive only in case you want to do some drifting. That is not something you often find, but it is configurable in this car, which frankly is pretty impressive. And also impressive in this screen is the camera system, which you can see here. You get a very high-quality camera in this car, no surprise given the price point, but there's a myriad of other cool camera things. Like, for example, this 3D exterior camera system, which shows an image all around the car to make it easy to fit into tight spots, and the vehicle shown in that image is this same car in this same color, which is a pretty neat trick. You also have a camera feature called car wash mode, which is a top-down frontal camera that allows you to perfectly line up the front wheels with like a car wash that you were driving into if you're trying to get them exactly positioned in the right spot. That's pretty cool. And you can even use the infotainment system to clean the cameras. You tap here and then the cameras automatically get squirted with water to clean them off in case you're driving around, it's a snowy day, there's salt and snow on the roads. Then you can clean off the cameras without having to get outside. Now, this is a full central touchscreen, this screen, as you can see. But if you don't don't want to touch, you could also use this controlling knob in the center console, which is actually pretty cool in itself. It twists all the way around, it's clear as you can see, and inside you have the M logo, which stays put in the upright position no matter how much twisting you do of the knob, which is a pretty cool trick. But anyway, next up, moving on to the other big screen in here, the gauge cluster screen. There's a lot to like in this screen. I love just how configurable it is. The center part can show you, for example, a map with your surroundings, which is obviously nice. It can show you the music you're listening to and all sorts of different vehicle information ranging from a simple trip odometer to G-forces and acceleration times. My disappointment with this gauge screen is that you can't show multiple things at once. If, for example, you want to see your map and your music, you can't, because only the center part is configurable, which is a shame. Other automakers let you configure 2 or even 3 parts of the cluster, but that isn't the case here. One other thing I like is that in the lower corners of this screen, it displays the range figures. Lower left, you have the range with both electric and gasoline, signified by a plug and a gas pump. Over on the right, you have the range with EV power only, which shows just a charger. Now, this car, according to the EPA, can drive about 25 miles on pure electric power alone before the gasoline engine kicks in. So you can go full silent, full EV if you want to, without using the full powertrain if you're trying to drive your M5 eco-friendly. Now, there are some cool things in this car that go beyond just those screens. For example, the engine start-stop button is this big red center button that feels very exciting to press and feels very performance-y. And on the subject of red buttons, you have 2 of them coming off the steering wheel, M1 and M2, which are 2 different configurable performance settings that you can set up. Since there's so much performance configuring you can do in the infotainment system, it's cool to be able to have 2 preset modes easily pressable at your thumb's reach, so you can tap into one whenever you want without having to go through each menu and configure everything to your exact liking. Also worth pointing out in here is the gear selector, the shift lever, which is this. It's really just kind of a little switch below the start-stop button, but you pull it down, it goes into drive, up it goes into reverse, neutral is in the center. It doesn't feel like an old school shift lever you stick into gear, and certainly not a manual transmission, but that's what the new M5 uses. Now, one cool old school touch they did incorporate here is the M-colored stitching. You can see on the inside of the steering wheel, you still have the 2 blues and red stitching like in old BMW M cars, and that's also true on the seat belts. The piping on the side has the M colors, which is a throwback to all older M vehicles, including this new one. It may be a brave, futuristic new vehicle, plug-in hybrid, big power, but it still does give that nod to M heritage. And next up, we climb into the back of the new M5, where you actually have one little subtle quirk just when you open the door. In between the front and rear doors of the M5 is a little M logo, subtly placed there and only visible when the doors are open. You can't see it when they're closed, so you rarely get to see it, but it is there and it is cool, and another reminder that this is an M car. But you climb into the back, and the first thing you see back here is it's huge. There is a lot of rear seat space back here, but then there had better be, given how big this car has become. The rear seat space really needed to happen, and fortunately it did. It really is a large back seat, and there are some nice amenities back here. For example, the rear speakers inside their little speaker grille give the ambient lighting color when you're just cruising around, which is a pretty cool touch. You also have rear seat climate vents back here. You can see 2 in the center. There's also on the B pillars, and you have rear seat climate controls. On this dedicated rear seat climate screen, you can turn on the air conditioning, change the temperature, exactly where it's coming out, and turn on your heated seats back here, all on a screen that is specific just for the rear seat climate zones, which is a pretty nice luxury feature to have. Now, back here you can also see 2 center-mounted USB-C ports for rear passengers to charge their devices, which is obviously obviously nice, and there's more charge ports than that. You look at the backs of the front seats where you see yet another M logo, and there's a little panel right below that logo. You open it up and you can see another charge port mounted in here for rear passengers to charge their devices. Now, the purpose of this panel is they sell some accessory that lets you mount a tablet back here so your rear passengers can watch stuff while they're driving along and plug it into this charge port, but you don't have to use it for that. It can also be just one more charge port for devices, which is frankly nice to have in back. And one other rather interesting rear touch in this car is the rear sunshade situation. This car has rear sunshades on both sides, and you manually lift them into place and clip them in, and then you have the sunshade, which is fairly normal in cars like this. The weird thing is there is also a manual rear sunshade for this small rear quarter window. In case you want to really shield yourself from all the sun, you can close that one as well. I have a suspicion that feature will basically never be used ever in one of these cars, but it is there and available. And one last thing worth mentioning, even in back, the seatbelts still have the M colors stitched into the side, just like they do in front. That cool nod to BMW M heritage even continues back here. They didn't cheap out, and it looks cool. And finally, we move on to the trunk. The cargo area of the new M5 opens up automatically, reveals actually a rather interestingly sized trunk. It's fairly deep. You can get some bigger stuff back here, and of course you can drop the rear seats for even larger items, but it isn't that huge on the sides. There's actually a lot of intrusion on the sides from what I presume is packaging, possibly due to the hybrid system in this car, and so you don't have any extra trunk space under the floor for smaller fragile items, and you don't have any like netted storage pockets off to the sides also for smaller stuff. So trunk space isn't exactly remarkable in this car, and it's weird not to see those little extra storage pockets that so many other vehicles have. Now, one other thing that I love in the trunks of modern BMW models, on the inside of the trunk lid, you have this little panel here that gives a phone number for BMW roadside assistance. Now, back in the day, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, BMW famously used to mount a toolkit here. And you would open this toolkit up and it had all the tools you could use to change a tire or a bulb in your car or a fuse by the side of the road. But now they've replaced the tools with a phone number that you can call so someone can do that for you, which I think says a lot about the types of people who are now buying these cars and frankly about how complicated these cars have become. You're not going to be doing roadside bulb changes with $3,000 LED taillights. It's just not going to happen. And speaking of how complicated these cars have become, let's talk pricing. The new M5 starts right around $123,000. Big money. This one has been equipped to just under $150,000, which is really big money. But it's also a big car with big technology and big power. Let's take it out on the road now and see how this new M5 drives. All right, driving the new M5. This car has earned a lot of opinions from a lot of different people on the internet, everywhere else, about a lot of aspects of it, because it is continuously divergent from the older M5s, the more analog, smaller, tossable cars that we knew in our childhood, and yet it remains sort of on the path, the trajectory the M5 have been going on, which is getting more powerful, getting larger, getting more technologically advanced. So you could look at this car in kind of two ways. Either, hey, it's straying further from the M5's purpose, or this is the M5's purpose in a modern era. Which way you want to choose to look at it is subjective, but I think it would cloud your view of how it drives. I will say this, from the perspective of a person who likes performance cars, not thinking about all the history of M5s and what BMW M means and all that stuff, this is a fun car to drive. This car has an enormous amount of power, and it is tremendously exciting when it puts the power down. It's still got a big old V8, it still rumbles, it still feels fast, really fast when you're accelerating, despite the added curb weight. This car also feels surprisingly dynamic. I'm driving this car here on a rare rainy day in San Diego, but I get these cars for several days, and I've had a lot of time to take it around and drive it. And I will tell you, it's actually pretty fun to throw around. It is a big car. There's no question about that. But something that has surprised me more and more in recent years doing car reviews is the ability that some of these manufacturers have to neutralize the massiveness of some of their vehicles by utilizing modern, impressive suspension technology. And that is absolutely the situation here. The new M5 is a big car, but I've been taking this on a lot of curves at a lot of speeds, and it does a damn good job of handling. The steering is relatively direct and relatively precise. It's a little lighter than I wish that it was, but that's sort of a function of a lot of new BMWs and frankly a lot of new performance cars. I think it's generally more what people want than the old school hydraulic, steering of yore. But other than that, when you go hard around corners, it's almost unbelievable the level to which this car doesn't body roll and doesn't really show you that it's a massive car. And then you get into the aspects that make it a good car otherwise, which is there's a lot of interior space. There's a luxurious interior with great materials, good technology. It's actually a surprisingly comfortable ride even in sport mode, which I'm driving in right now. It's actually fairly compliant. It is a very good daily car. The thing the M5 has always done well, regardless of which versions you loved, is be a great all-arounder, a car that you could take your family in, a car that you could drive, to work and in luxury and comfort, and yet still have the occasional, Autobahn bursts of speed and have some fun in the corners. And this car honestly succeeds in all of those areas. And it may not be the little old M5 that we remember, but the M3 does kind of now fill that space, if we're being honest, and the M2 fills the space where the M3 used to be, and it all works out. A lot of the people who complain that this M5 isn't the real M5 are talking about cars from 20 years ago. At the end of the day, they're not spending $150,000 on a brand new M5, and the people who are seem to be continually rewarding BMW for developing the cars with more power, more tech, more gadgets, more size. That is a plus to a lot of the people driving these cars. And so from my perspective, looking at it as someone who is potentially interested in a car like this, not me, but if I were someone like that, this car has a lot of appeal. I think it checks a lot of the boxes that the last M5s always have. And I understand some people don't like how it looks and how big it is and that there's a plug-in hybrid and blah, blah, blah. But from a pure, this is a fun car and does it all kind of perspective, this is a fun car and does it all. And if I were BMW, it would be kind of annoying to hear all these complaints from all these purists who haven't bought a new BMW in 30 years. When you're actually delivering a pretty damn good product in this new M5. And I'm not some crazy BMW apologist. I'm going to sit here and say there are some BMWs that are very questionable, like the new XM, which I think is a disastrous failure of a car. This isn't that. This is a really good car from the perspective of someone who would actually be interested in a car like this. I think it improves on the old one. I think there's a lot to like here. It's massively fast, surprisingly dynamic, and just a great all-rounder like the M5 has always been. You're never going to go back to the M5 in the late 90s and the early 2000s, but for 2024, given what people want from these cars, 25, this car does the job. And so that's the new 2025 BMW M5. The BMW M purists hate this car, and I get it. We're a long way from the smaller, tossable, manual transmission M5 models of their youth. But when you consider the lineage of the M5, this car seems like the next logical step, and it is very fast and very thrilling to drive. Anyway, now it's time to give the new M5 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 71 out of 100, which puts the new M5 here against similar cars. I know, BMW purists hate the new M5 for its size and weight and tech, but actual people in this segment buying cars like this will appreciate basically everything this car has to offer. The power, the gadgets, the interior space, the amazing ability to corner despite its weight, and ride smoothly despite its handling prowess. I think the new M5 is excellent. Huge and expensive, yes, but excellent, and it deserves serious consideration against some very high-quality rivals.